Howard Pritchartt Jr. is 83. Except for his school and service years, he spent all his life in Natchez. He graduated from Natchez High in 1943 and was inducted into the Army at Camp Shelby, went to the Infantry Replacement Center in Tyler, Texas. That training was cut short during the Battle of the Bulge, and he was among many others sent over to reinforce Allied troops.
They sent us all over to Europe, and it just happened that I, with the group I was with, went over on the Queen Mary. And it landed.
Very large ship, right?
Oh, huge, yeah. Slow roll. They still zigzagged on account of the potential submarine.
Were you in a convoy or just by yourself?
No, just alone, the one vessel. Yeah. But it was fast and massive, and the zigzag was to avoid submarine,
right,
which was still a threat, and landed at, I think it was Gurk, Scotland. And from there, we went by train to England, stayed there a short while. And after that, we crossed in a very small vessel, crossed the channel and landed at Le Havre, which was just desecrated. I mean, it was hard.
Was it? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And we walked for miles, it seemed like, and finally got on one of these little narrow gauge railways. They called them 40 and 8. 40 mules or 8 men. You heard of the 40 and 8 club.
Sure.
So anyway, you could see the flashing from the front, and it sounded like thunder. It was still way back from the front. But every night, every day, you'd get closer, and they would start pulling men out and say, okay, you group, you go to tanks. Next group, well, you go to infantry. And well, one night they pulled us out, and they gave us M1 rifles and said, now you're going to be using these in a day or so. They were wrapped up in paper with cosmoline grease. It was cold over there. It was freezing. It was still late winter.
Right.
And we all built fires, and some of the men caught the wood part of the guns on fire. But then the next day they gave us a handful of bullets and said, go out behind one of these houses. This was in a little village somewhere. I forget just where it was. But anyway,
in France, right?
Belgium, I think it was.
Okay.
And I couldn't hit the side of a barn, so I went back the next day and filled my helmet up and went back out there where I could halfway shoot the thing. Then we got back on the train the next day, and at night they pulled us out, and they put me in an artillery battalion. And they took away my M1 and gave me a carbine, which the only thing I ever did was shoot the electrical things off the telephone poles over there. But anyway, this artillery battalion was the big cannons, 8-inch rifles, huge. They called them tubes. When the tubes would burn out, the carriage would remain and they would replace the tubes. Mm-hmm. But I went to a headquarters battery and work on a switchboard, and they had a contact with the firing batteries. I think there were 3 firing batteries. And this wasn't too far back because it was probably a mile or 2 behind the front. And
By then they'd gotten control in the Bulge, had they, or do you remember?
Yeah, it started going back the other way because, frankly, the Germans, what won the war was lack of fuel on part of the Germans.
Right.
Oh, they'd throw their motorcycles down. I found a motorcycle. I had a great time riding a motorcycle. But anyway, we would ended up, there would sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 of us be gone from the rest of the group way out over this empty countryside, stringing lines to the guns or to the observation point. And we'd find a place to sleep in an empty house. Some of them were still burning. You'd see a dead German laying around once in a while. They would always leave them out for morale purposes for our side. The only dead Americans I ever saw were in the back of a truck. You know, they'd get them out of sight. That's infantry. They're the boys that really were suffering. Poor infantry. You'd see them coming back past it sometime, and you could tell they'd been through hell. But anyway, the first night I was with that battalion, they put us in a little empty house, and I got in the corner underneath the window, and all of a sudden there was a horrible explosion outside. The whole window fell in on me. They had it boarded up, and it was a concussion from the guns, from our guns. And finally, after 15 or 20 minutes, you got so used to it, it didn't bother you, know. There was a lot of artillery fire everywhere. But the only time I ever thought maybe something might be incoming, they ran in there and some man ran in all upset. Hey, that's incoming, that's it. Well, how can you tell? It's all noisy. I know, I can tell. Get out, everybody got to find a foxhole. So I went out and I said, I doubt it. So anyway, I got in this foxhole. It was cold, but that was the only time I ever was in a foxhole, and that wasn't, it wasn't incoming, it was outgoing fire. But anyway, after the war ended, all these Germans were surrounded. They're just everywhere.
So you never saw any Germans in actual firing positions?
No,
or, you know?
No, but artillery was not
Your artillery
too far.
behind the lines then?
Yeah, we were behind the front lines with this artillery.
Right.
And I'm sure there was incoming because that's where it ended, just plenty of artillery fire. And the airplanes going across, the bombers, and they would drop this, look like tinfoil you put on a Christmas tree. And I asked somebody, what is that tinfoil? They said, well, they call it window. It's to break up the you know, the Germans couldn't tell. It broke up their
radar or something?
Radar, yeah. But, and the tanks, this was beginning to cross the Rhine. So actually I was in what they call 2 campaigns, Central Europe and then crossing of the Rhine. But I never even saw the Rhine. We were back. But
the war was still going on at this time.
Yeah, the war was still going on, and the war formally ended. I think it was my 18th birthday was April 14th, and the war actually ended. I think it was May the 7th. From then on, there were just hordes of troops coming back from the Eastern Front trying to get out of the Russians. You wouldn't believe the tens of thousands of people.
You're talking about German troops now?
Mostly German troops, but mixed with them were a lot of, you could even see Slavic features on some of those people. Probably part of the Russians. They were all heading back this way because the Russians, they didn't have much patience for anything, you know. I didn't know it at the time, but I heard later, you know, they lost 500,000 men after they had encircled Berlin. All they had to do was starve them out. They cared nothing about their own lives. They lost 500,000 men. That was the news. I didn't have anything to do with that, but that's hard to believe.
Yes.
But anyway, they turned us loose, and we roamed the countryside, picking up stuff, all kind of stuff laying around, artillery pieces and rifles and parts of uniforms, steel helmets by the thousands, and we just went and picked up all kind of stuff. They would let us send stuff home as long as it was cut to a certain length to package, and we sent rifles and all